You're listening to The Resilient Animal. I'm Annie Peterson, Doctor of Education with a Master's in Mental Health Recovery and Trauma-Informed Care. This podcast is an exploration of how helping other living beings can benefit mental health and what makes us all resilient animals. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of The Resilient Animal. Today, we're speaking with someone outside of the United States. This is Maya Badham, and she is from Safeguarding Animal and Human Survivors of Sexual and Domestic Abuse. Welcome, Maya. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I wanted so we refer to it as SAHSDA, SAHSDA. And I'm going to have you tell us where you are right now.
Sure. So I live in the Forest of Dean, which is in the county of Gloucestershire, which is on the South Wales, England border.
Okay. And Maya and I had a really interesting conversation last week or a couple of weeks ago, just talking a lot about animals, of course, laws that impact people and animals, the United States versus UK. And I actually found you on LinkedIn. I thought you were posting some really amazing information. So can you just tell us a little bit about the organization and what you do?
Absolutely. SAHSDA was set up in January this year, but we've been doing a bit of work end of last year. And we're an international organisation looking to raise awareness of the use of companion animals as a tactic of coercive controlling behaviour within domestic abuse relationships or family settings. So we do guest lecturing and training, research and consultancy to help different sectors improve their ability to recognise and respond effectively to that issue. So I talk with pet professionals, so that's anyone from vets and rescue to canine behaviourists and trainers to groomers to hydrotherapists, canine massage therapists. And then we also do speak with police, social services and frontline domestic abuse service providers as well, so your specialist support workers. And yeah, the idea is that lots of people have the knowledge, so they understand that if someone harms animals, they're more likely to harm humans and etc. But the issue is that they're not practically applying that information in a way that is effective safety planning for both the human victim survivor or the animal victim survivor. So we're really interested in the impact of coercive control and domestic abuse on the emotional life of the animal as well. So we come at the issue from not just a human-centric point of view, but from a more holistic point of view that includes the animal. So one of my taglines is, so we talk about a whole family approach when we talk about managing risk and safety planning, but quite often services don't include the pet in that. So my tagline is a whole family approach must include the pet, because that to me is what best practice holistic support looks like.
When you discuss coercive control, what does that mean? What are you looking at when you talk about that?
Yeah, most people when you talk about domestic abuse, they immediately think of physical violence, and they think then of the signs of physical violence, bruises or bleeding or bite marks or injuries quite a lot of the time. Whereas coercive control is much more looking at the emotional impact of abuse and it's the tight everyday control of someone's ability to live their life freely and independently and make decisions for themselves. So coercive control is a pattern of behaviour that limits that person's ability to make choices or be themselves. It's also about their ability to freely express who they are. So it might be that the perpetrator controls what that person wears or what that person looks like. So whether they can wear makeup or not. It might be economic abuse. So part of that is they might not let that person work, or if they do let them work, there's kind of limitations around who they can work with, or you can't work with other men, or you can't work these hours, or you can't work at this place. Or they might limit their ability to get to work. So they might say, I don't have any problem with you working, but we really don't need two cars, so I'm just going to use the one car. and you have to take public transport, but maybe there is no public transport in that area. So they're making a world that isolates that person and makes it much more difficult for that person to live freely. And the use of pets can come under economic abuse. So if the perpetrator doesn't allow the person to take their animal to the vet or doesn't allow them to buy food for the animal, in the UK that comes under our Domestic Abuse Act 2020. We classify that as a crime. And then other forms of coercive control are things like, can that person use the bathroom? How many times can they use the bathroom? It can be really insidious and tight control of that person's whole body and the environment around them. And the purpose of that is to make that person dependent on the perpetrator, because that allows them to have power and control, and that's what that perpetrator is looking for. And unfortunately, the perpetrator to everyone else often seems like a really caring and charming person. So it's quite difficult sometimes to spot coercive control, but once you know what it is, it can actually be quite easy to see it, because once it all starts to click, you can see, oh, that's not just them having a preference or a weird kind of quirky personality trait. That's a form of them trying to maintain control over that person. And the reason that they come across as charming to others is because they're trying to prevent people from believing that person if they were to say disclose what's happening, because the perpetrator will be telling the victim survivor, no one will believe you, why would they believe you over me? And then they wear that person down. So it's called gaslighting. So they psychologically harm that person to make them believe that no one likes them, that no one believes them, that they're the problem. And that's all coercive control. But they'll use the animal in that as well. So they might say, you love that animal more than me, and that's not okay, and that's not fair to me, so you need to get rid of that animal, or something like that. They frame your love for your animal as something bad or something immoral, kind of thing.
Yeah, and we had discussed on our phone conversation, we had discussed the link in that not only do people, when there is that kind of control going on, not only is there, hey, you love the animal more than me, you need to get rid of him. There's also, hey, I know how much you love this animal, so I'm keeping him forever. And if you leave, I'm going to hurt him, or something such as that. And is that something in your work as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the biggest tactics of perpetrators is threats, like you say. It's really an effective tactic that isn't in any way physical, it's completely mental. So if you have something that you love, whether that's an animal, whether that's a child, whether that's your great grandma's ring, and they pawn that ring, or they threaten that they're going to harm your animal or your child, you will do anything to try and prevent that. So they don't even actually have to lay a finger on you to make you fear that something bad is going to happen. And that's really the hallmark of domestic abuse and coercive control, is fear. And it's a really good tactic, unfortunately, to make someone be frightened and afraid. And when we look at risk, that's the first question on the abuse risk assessment is, do you feel afraid? Are you frightened? And then the second bit is, what are you afraid of? Because fear is such a crucial indicator. And the higher I was going to say the higher the fear, that the higher the risk, which is true. But unfortunately, because the longer you're in a relationship with someone that is harming you psychologically, emotionally, and physically, sometimes you sometimes might not say you're scared, because they've normalized it to a point where you might not see it as being fearful anymore, and you might minimize it because you love that person, because they don't just start off being horrible people. They often will do, it's called like the entrapment. So it's called like grooming. So you'll meet them, they'll be irresistibly charming and nice. They might even be over the top. They might be buying lots of gifts. They might be taking you on or offering to take you on holidays. They might be taking you out to these elaborate dinners, and all these things that come across as very romantic, but it can be quite intense right at the start. And that's to kind of speed up that love, that bond, because we all love people that have sometimes been mean to us, not abusive to us, but we all love someone who's said something to us that's hurt us, especially if you have a sibling. I'm thinking about me and my sister as when we were younger, but they'll weaponize that in a much more insidious way, and then over time they'll cut you off from your family and friends, or they'll take over your technology, or they'll use your technology. And so it's often not this big thing. It's a very drip control until it's really hard then to come out of that situation without there potentially being an escalation in that perpetrator's behaviour.
Yeah, and that's especially for someone who has either come out of a negative relationship or something like that. Someone used the term love bombing to me once. I'd
Yeah.
never heard that before, but it just completely makes sense. It just completely makes sense. Go from feeling completely unloved to this absolute encompassing love that then turns into something that can be, not all the time, of course, but something that can become quite negative. Something that I would like you to maybe talk a little bit about what led you to founding this organization. You have a really interesting background, and I'd love for you to share that with everyone.
Great, thank you. I've always been interested in inequality and specifically gender inequality, inequality. And I did both my degrees looking at different forms of oppression, really. So I did an undergrad in history looking at gendered oppression throughout time and kind of the equal rights movement in different countries and with different groups. And then I did a master's in human rights law, again looking at the LGBTQ plus oppression in different countries and whether they're sufficiently protected under different laws. But then I left uni and I worked in the coroner's office for a bit. So I was looking at unnatural and suspicious deaths, which included those who've sadly been killed by an intimate partner or family member, as well as children. And from there, I was really interested in kind of what motivates people to do such a horrific act. And I knew I really wanted to work with people, living people. So I moved into frontline advocacy. So I'm a qualified independent sexual violence advisor. And I worked for several years on the front line supporting survivors from around anyone over the age of about 15 who had been subjected to sexual abuse and intimate partner abuse, so domestic violence and abuse. And so there I was working in a very multi-agency way. So we're working with policing, we're working with social services, we're working with health, we're working with benefits and welfare and housing and GPs, because what we're trying to do is help make that person safe and help support them to recover from the trauma that they've been subjected to by others, either recently or in the past. And then I left that role and I moved now into training. So for the last 5 years, I've been delivering training to those statutory and voluntary agencies to help improve their knowledge and understanding of domestic and sexual abuse so that they're able to effectively respond in a way that's trauma-informed, needs-led, strength-based, intersectional, so that we're making sure every survivor, no matter who they are, no matter where in the country they are, whatever intersectional identities they have, deserve the right to be safe and they deserve the right to have a good response when they come to services. And then, so Safeguarding Animal and Human Survivors of Sexual and Domestic Abuse came about because I've been making lots of these connections, and especially with my own animals, my dog, I realised that a lot of the ways that I would work in a trauma-informed way with my survivors, and especially the young adults and the children, mirrored how I would work with him when he's scared or when he's anxious or fearful. And I started working with canine behaviourists and trainers initially because I noticed that there was a real gap in their understanding of their safeguarding responsibilities. Just because they're often self-employed without a HR department, they work in rural areas quite a lot or in isolation. I focused on them initially, and as a result, we've got some training now just about to be released in the next few weeks going into summer. And it's an international training, so it will be available worldwide for pet professionals to complete. So that they'll be able to, it's the first of its kind, it's completely unique, it's tailored to those working with animals. So they're going to be able to recognise when their animal or human client might be showing signs that they're being abused and then what to do about it. But the training is really clear that we're not expecting pet professionals to become experts in domestic abuse or any form of intense counselling or anything like that. Really, the responsibility is just to know who to and when to pass that information to those whose job it is then to step in and do that further safeguarding responsibility. So I'm really excited for that to be available to people. And I hope people are interested in and take that up. And then since then, I've branched out. So I'm looking now to deliver that different training, but on the same topic to those different sectors. So policing, social services, and frontline domestic and sexual abuse services. So that effectively we're creating a cultural change throughout society so that everyone is doing their best to meet those needs of those survivors and ultimately prevent serious harm to both the animal and the human.
Something that we talked about, and I love people who work with people and animals, and it's so interesting to discuss specific things that I know exist, but then to actually talk with somebody who has seen the results of certain things that have happened. So, one of and like I mentioned earlier, I found out about you through LinkedIn. And one of the things that you had talked a little bit about, and we spoke briefly about it previously, was sexual abuse of animals, too. And even though that's something that we know exists, I think it's a tough thing for people to address. And that's something that
Mm.
you're trying to address with your work as well.
Yeah, it's a specific area of interest for me just because my background is in human sexual violence and abuse. So it's a natural kind of interest in that makes if that makes sense. So yeah, it's definitely an under researched and underspoken about topic because it's so horrific to think about. But it's something that I'm definitely interested in doing further research on. The research that exists shows that there is a crossover with child sexual abuse and animal sexual abuse. One study found that in child sexual abuse imagery, so when a police go and they find out someone's accessing images of child sexual abuse, and within that catalogue, there's often also animal sexual abuse imagery. And they used to think these people are so messed up that they just download everything and it just all comes in one bundle. They're not looking for that. It's just that it all comes when they download it. And what we know now is that's not necessarily true or very likely to be true. It is likely to be that they are seeking that specific type of imagery to download, as well as the child sexual abuse imagery. And I have a mentor in the United States called Jenny Edwards. So I will mention her because she deserves to be credited with the information that she shared with me. But she's been a real fountain of knowledge. She's been looking at animal sexual abuse for at least 2 decades, and she's an expert. She does like a lot of expert witness work with police when they investigate animal sexual abuse. But what I found interesting was that some of the ways in which perpetrators of animal sex abuse the animal is quite gendered in nature. So the language that they use and the positions that they use are a mirror kind of human females. So it's a really interesting link there, I think, around misogyny and sexism when we look. And this is why it's so important to talk about the link between animal abuse and human abuse, because when you look at them in isolation, so we're going to only talk about human abuse and we're only going to talk about abuse of animals, and we don't recognise how intertwined the two are and how interdisciplinary the topics are, we do a massive disservice to both sets of victims, because we just miss the crucial information when we divide it into different camps rather than seeing those connections and using the information from the connections to better protect both sets apart, both parties.
Yeah, and of course we know that people that experience that kind of behavior have been traumatized, but so have the animals, and they're very traumatized with that kind of experience. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit about your when you spoke to Parliament, and that was recently. Is that correct? If you could just talk to us a little bit about that and what you spoke about.
Yeah, sure. So that was in October 2023. I was invited to speak at the All Party Parliamentary Group Advisory Dog Welfare Group. I always get the acronym. The acronym is APDAWG, so it's not a short acronym. And they were doing an event in collaboration with the Nature Watch Foundation on the use of companion animals within domestic abuse. Because it was our Day of Domestic Abuse Awareness Month. Sorry, I sat on a panel, so it wasn't just me speaking. There was a survivor, someone with lived experience came and spoke about experience of coercive control, and then there was also other speakers from different places. But I was speaking on what we talked about already, so the use of the different ways animals are using coercive behaviour. So we talked a little bit about how they use it in economic abuse. We talked about threats. We know that animals and pets, the pet companion animal human bond, is a barrier for leaving. So those who are in serious domestic abuse relationships where the risk is high, they find it difficult to leave compared to those who don't have pets because they're so scared of what will happen to the animal if they were to leave. And delayed leaving can also increase risk as well. I talked about that, and also the companion animal human bond as a protective factor. And what we mean by that is if you're living in a world where you're just constantly being told that you're worthless and that no one loves you and that you're ugly and you're all these horrible things about you, animals don't treat you like that. Like they love you for you. And so when you're living in a world and you think everyone else thinks that, you don't have to feel like you have any escape, and your self-esteem and your mental health, your trauma is really full. Having an animal with you is healing, and also it helps you regulate that trauma in a way so that you can cope. So it's almost like a coping mechanism for those who are being subjected to coercive control and domestic abuse. And it's a really powerful protective factor for that person. Unfortunately, perpetrators obviously know that, so they can also continue to weaponize that relationship. They might find ways to stop that companionship happening. I had it where the victim wasn't allowed to be in the same room as their pet. And that's so traumatic, emotionally traumatic for the human, but also for you see me today with Hector, with my cat, who is very clingy. Even when I have to pop him out with the door closed sometimes to do a meeting, he can get quite upset. So you imagine like that 100 times fold, and then if say the dog starts howling or the cat starts meowing a lot, the perpetrator might physically harm them because they want them to shut up. So it can become like a bit of an excuse for that person to do the harm that they are actually wanting to do, and it is a choice. So we talk about those who abuse others through coercive control, domestic abuse, sexual violence. They're making a choice to do that because they know that they shouldn't be doing it. They know that it's harmful to that person and they're or that animal, and they're choosing to do it anyway. That's something to bear in mind, because there's this myth of, oh, they have an anger problem or they just see red or all of these things. And what the research says, that's not true. It's often a calculated choice that someone's made to abuse another person. And because the abuse is often so controlled, so how can you simultaneously lose control and be in a lot of control at the same time? So lots of perpetrators will know how hard to hit someone so it doesn't leave a bruise, or they'll know where to hit someone or hurt someone so that it doesn't show on like their face or something like that. So you can't say, oh, I lost control, while simultaneously making the choice where to harm or how to harm that person or that animal. So that's where it can get a little bit complex in terms of when we talk about the issue. So they might bring animals into the home that scare the victim. So if you're really scared of snakes, for example, they might purposefully go and get a pet snake, and that just creates another environment of fear. Or they might, if you already had an animal They might bring another animal in that has is aggressive. So if you had, say, a little dog, maybe you had like a Chihuahua or something like that, they might then bring in a big dog that has a predatory sequence that is dangerous for that little dog, and they just have no concern or care about that at all. We often see as well dogs being perpetrators turning dogs into weapons, so they'll purposely harm them so much psychologically and physically that they are a bite risk or they are a danger to humans and other animals, and they'll do that on purpose as a way of control. Then you're living in a house where you're scared of this animal, or they'll threaten to release the animal. And we talked about the intersections, but there's a crossover with and those who use animals and kind of other crimes, drug crimes and human trafficking and other serious issues as well. It's all intertwined because, say, like dog fighting, for example, that's linked with kind of drug trafficking and drug dealing, and then both of those are linked with domestic abuse for sure, because those who are perpetrating those types of crimes often have a very fixed idea about gender roles, and when domestic abuse comes from a kind of a male entitlement, power and control, hierarchical view of they're the master at the top, and women and animals are at the bottom. And that's not to say there are no male survivors and there are no female perpetrators, because there absolutely are, but it is a gendered crime and a gendered issue for sure.
You're also doing some work with, so it's not just pets that you're doing work with, even though that's something that we've talked about, but you're doing some work with farm veterinarians now as well, right? And so, what are some things that
Yeah.
they are just needing to be aware of?
So I think with farm vets, often it's more understanding the rural domestic abuse and how that's different from more domestic abuse within urban. It's not that the typology is different; it's that if you're already isolated because of where you live, you there's an additional element that they don't have to isolate you because you're already isolated. So that's another high risk area. Also, I know this is a different cultural context from the US, but in the UK, those who live rurally are more likely to have a firearms license because of their because it's linked to farming. And when we talk about domestic abuse, we talk about weapons, and obviously it's a higher risk if they have access to weapons. And in the UK, most people, like 90% of people, don't have firearms easily accessible. So I would be talking about that in terms of risk in a UK context. I've never seen a gun. So I'm 31. I've never seen a gun in real life other than armed police having it. That's it.
Yeah, yeah.
So compared to like my friends in the States who definitely have seen, in the UK, it's just not common at all.
Yeah, it's a
So
whole other situation.
it really,
Here.
you bring up other animals, because this week I've just been, so I sit on the National Working Group on Spiritual and Ritual Abuse. We're looking to better recognise and understand how those who use beliefs about religion and witchcraft and black magic weaponize that in against other people, and harm them, and not just in the domestic setting but wider than that. And myself and the chair of that group set up another subgroup to look at the use of animals within spiritual and ritual abuse. And there I'm looking less at companion animals, I'm looking more at kind of wildlife trafficking. So we're looking at what others might be bringing into the country for the purposes of spiritual and ritual abuse. So things like amulets made from animal parts, or animal blood that might be used for animal like rituals, and then also looking at kind of animal sacrifice as well. So that's a new piece of work for me. It's definitely not my expert area, but it's something that I'm working with others to look at how we can better protect both, again, victims and animals from that form of abuse, which is really interesting.
Mm-hmm. You do some really heavy work, Maya, and I think I shared this with you when we were talking on the phone that I went through a humane officer academy, and I'm glad I did because it really helped me to appreciate those that can do that job. That's not a job I don't think I would last very long in that position, and but it's so necessary to have people that are doing that work, and it's so necessary for you to be doing your work too, Maya, and I really appreciate it.
Whoever is listening, that everyone has a part to play in safeguarding animals and humans. I think we often think, oh wow, that's someone else's job, that's someone else's problem. That's not my remit. That's outside of my role. And I think we need to start moving away from that to being an active bystander. And what that means is doesn't have to always mean stepping in physically. It doesn't always have to mean responding immediately, but what it does mean is that we do have to do some actions if we are told or suspect. And I know it's really hard because people, they're scared of offending other people, they're scared of being wrong. And I always say I'd rather be wrong and have done something than not do anything and be right. And so I'm just really hoping people take that message on and come on the training or reach out and and just learn and be there. It's safeguarding sounds really scary, but it's really not. It's literally just take the information and give it to someone else. Like you just like a hot potato, you pass it to someone. But I think what's important is when we think everyone else, or someone else must know about this, or someone else must be doing that work. Someone else might be, but you might hold one part of the puzzle that isn't input, that isn't with those other agencies. And you don't know how powerful you might think, oh, this is a really small piece of the puzzle, but to that victim and that family, it might be actually really critical. But yeah, it's be professionally curious, come and upskill yourself, and hopefully then we can all work together to make the world a safer place for everyone, humans and animals.
And I'm glad you brought that up. It's not a matter of you running in and physically trying to rescue an animal from a
Yeah,
situation because individuals need to be
yeah,
safe themselves, but knowing who the people are who can go in and take care of that
yeah.
situation, just ignoring it is not helping at all. And we're going to end with you telling us a little bit about Hector and Podrick. Podrick? Is that correct?
Podrick, yeah,
Podrick.
yeah,
Okay.
pod, or pod's fine.
Okay. Tell us about them.
Yeah. How long have you got? They're just the loves of my lives, really. So Hector, who's behind me, I know they can't see,
Yeah, it's so
but
funny. He
um,
looked right at you when you said love of my life. He was like, yeah, I know.
so Hector is my cat. He's 8 years old. He's just a moggy black long-haired cat that I got in a really from a really weird story, so I won't tell it now. But he was a kind of a bargain bucket type rescue situation, and he came with his brother Hummus, as in because he was like a gingery colour. Who sadly he's passed away now. But so Hector's going strong. He's such a character. Lots of people say cats are so aloof. Cats are so independent, and you've seen him. He's just such a mummy's boy. He's like the complete opposite of the stereotype. He just always wants to be near me, on me, constant cuddles and pets. And then Podrick is my 5-year-old border collie, who is just a joy. He's just loves life and is very such a happy dog. And again, just is such a good companion, and we reciprocate that
Oh,
together. Yeah, I'm
oh,
jealous. I'm talking about Pod.
yeah. And
Um,
Hector just put
and
his little papa on your shoulder. Oh, that's sweet. That was sweet.
And yeah, so Podrick, I really credit, I know close your ears, Hector, but I really credit Podrick for this work even existing because I found him just so interesting as a being that he inspired me to understand dogs and dog behaviour, and from there met lots of really interesting people, and that's where SAHSDA was born, was from those connections. So we owe Pod a great deal.
Yeah, it's interesting how just an experience with one or two, one or two particular animals can really expand your mind in terms of what can I do to improve this situation.
Mhm.
So Maya, I would love for you to end with your contact information, how people can reach out to you, and I will also include the information in the show notes.
Sure. Yeah. The organisation is Safeguarding Animal and Human Survivors of Sexual and Domestic Abuse, so SAHSDA. My email is www.sahsda.org, so it's SAHSDA.org, and the website is www.org. The details about the new training are on the website, so we'll make sure we put that in the description. So there's going to be one of those trainings is a qualification. So it's the IPET Network Level 2 Award in Understanding Safeguarding for Pet Professionals. So that's a regulated qualification that someone can do to be qualified in the subject. But I'm also just about to start at, but it won't take very long, to do an e-learning version. So it will be a self-paced course. And if you come on the qualification, you'll also get a safeguarding certified badge for your website and your marketing materials. If you come on both, sorry, you don't have to come on both, but one or the other, you'll also get a template safeguarding policy and procedures. So you can change the document to your organisation, so then you'll have something, and you'll also have access to there will be a new Facebook group for those who've done the courses who are looking for additional support or if they have questions as well. So I've tried to make it as attractive to people to do as possible with some freebies and because the e-learning is self-paced, it's hopefully more attractive to worldwide, because with the qualification it's digital live delivery. So I'll be delivering, but because of the time zones, and America has multiple times.
Oh, yeah, we do. It's hard for Americans to keep track of the American time zones.
so, so I'm going to try and do a couple of live qualifications that are in the US time zone, but I think a lot of people would prefer probably to do the self-paced version for sure.
I'm just looking at Hector. He's making little muffins on you, and he is just
Yeah,
so happy. So I just want to thank Maya so much for speaking with us. We'll have all of her information available in the show notes, along with the contact information that she just gave us. And thank you so much, Maya. Thank you, Hector. Thank you, Podrick, I'm not looking at right now. But thank you so much for the work and everything you do. And we'll talk soon.
thank you so much.